Translate this, and my salary is yours." It was a cruel joke made in a billion-dollar boardroom aimed at a document no one could read. They never expected the janitor in the hallway, the man they never even saw, was the one person who understood its devastating secret. What he did next would rewrite all their stories forever. In the heart of a city that never slept inside a tower of steel and glass that scraped the clouds, Miguel Alvarez moved through the quiet hours between one day and the next. He was a man made of stillness, his presence measured not by sound, but by the steady, rhythmic sweep of his mop across the polished marble floors of Bayanova headquarters. To the executives who hurried past him during the day, their worlds a blur of ambition and deadlines, he was part of the building's architecture, a fixture as unnoticed and as necessary as the hushed hum of the ventilation system. But in the deep quiet of 3 a.m., under the cold glow of the emergency lighting, Miguel was not a fixture. He was a guardian. He was the keeper of the silence, the polisher of reflections, a man who understood that the most important work is often the work that no one sees. You don't mop because people notice. You mop so they don't slip. His life was a tale of two worlds. There was this one, the sterile, echoing expanse of Bayanova, a billion-dollar biotech empire where the air smelled of ozone and ambition. And then there was his other world, a small, warm apartment, 3 train stops away, a place that smelled of cinnamon and drying paint. That world was filled with the vibrant, messy, beautiful chaos of his 10-year-old daughter, Camila. She was the center of his universe, the sun his quiet planet orbited. Her laughter was the only sound that could truly fill the vast empty spaces left behind when his wife Elena had said her final goodbye 3 years ago. Elena had been a historian, a woman who saw stories in everything, in the cracks of a sidewalk, in the melody of a forgotten song. It was she who had first seen the professor in Miguel, the brilliant mind that could dance between the intricate grammars of a dozen languages. But after she was gone, the lecture halls and academic debates felt hollow. The words lost their meaning. All that mattered was Camila. So he had traded his tweed jacket for a janitor's uniform, his professorship for a steady paycheck, and hours that allowed him to be there every morning to make her pancakes and every afternoon to see the art she had created at school. He had chosen presence over prestige, a quiet life of dignity over a loud one of acclaim. He regretted nothing. As he pushed his cart through the executive wing on the 40th floor, the city lights below glittered like a fallen constellation. He paused, looking at his own faint reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. He saw a tired man, his face etched with the quiet grief and resilient love that defined him. Beside his reflection, he saw the ghost of the man he used to be, Professor Alvarez, a master of linguistics. But the ghost didn't haunt him. It simply reminded him that a person is more than their title, more than the uniform they wear. A person is the sum of their choices, the weight of their love. And as he picked up his mop and continued his work, he knew his choices had made him strong, and his love had made him whole. The silence of the tower wasn't empty. It was filled with the purpose of a father's promise. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths, and Miguel's truth was etched into every clean floor, every polished surface, a silent testament to a life lived with honor, far from the spotlight he had so willingly left behind. The hum of the cleaning buffer was a familiar lullaby in the pre-dawn stillness of the 40th floor. Miguel was working his way toward the main boardroom, a chamber known to the staff as the Cathedral, a place where fortunes were made and careers were broken. The door was slightly ajar, casting a blade of sharp white light into the dimly lit hallway. Voices crisp and laced with the tension of a late-night session spilled out. He would normally pass by his presence trained to be as unobtrusive as a shadow, but a single sharp laugh, brittle as breaking glass, made him pause. His hand stilled on the buffer, the machine's drone dying into a heavy silence. Inside, Veronica Liang, the CEO of Bionova, stood at the head of the massive mahogany table. She was a woman who seemed to have been carved from the same cool marble as the lobby floors, flawless, composed, and unyielding. Her eyes, the color of dark coffee, swept over her exhausted executive team. Spread before them were stacks of documents, the debris of a marathon negotiation. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the palpable weight of a billion-dollar decision. Standing beside her, radiating a smug, predatory confidence, was Eric Shaw, the COO. He held up a thick, binder-clipped document, its pages dense with a typeface that looked like black-letter scripture. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eric announced, his voice dripping with condescension, "the final partnership agreement from our friends at Zeitgeist Innovations, in German, of course, denser than a black hole." He let the document drop to the table with a theatrical thud. Several executives chuckled nervously. Eric's gaze fixed on a junior analyst who looked pale with exhaustion. "You speak any German, kid?" The analyst shook his head. Eric smiled a thin, cruel slash. "Didn't think so." He then turned his performance to Veronica, his voice loud enough to carry into the hall. "Tell you what, V, I'll make it a company-wide challenge. Anyone can have a crack at it." He patted the document. "Translate this, and my salary is yours." The boardroom erupted in sycophantic laughter. It was a joke, but it was forged with the casual cruelty of power, designed to mock the impenetrable nature of the document while cementing his own authority. Power without integrity isn't leadership, it's theft. And in that room, they were stealing dignity just for sport. Miguel, standing motionless in the hallway, felt the sting of the words more than anyone could imagine. It wasn't just the arrogance, it was the profound disrespect for language, for the very idea that words were simply obstacles to be bulldozed by money. Veronica Liang did not laugh. A flicker of something annoyance, perhaps, or weariness crossed her face before her perfect professional mask settled back into place. She gave a curt nod. "Wrap it up, Eric. We'll have legal give it a cursory look in the morning." Her voice was dismissive. She saw the document as a formality, the final piece of paper in a deal she believed was already secured. She didn't see the danger in what she couldn't read. She didn't see the quiet janitor in the hallway, a man for whom language was not a barrier, but a sacred, intricate map. And in that moment, Miguel felt an old dormant part of himself stir, the professor, the protector of meaning, who knew that the devil didn't just hide in the details. He wrote them into the fine print. The cruel laughter from the boardroom echoed in Miguel's mind long after the lights had been shut off and the executives had descended in their silent elevators. It was a sound that stuck to the ribs, a cold, sharp shard of disdain. As he finished his rounds, his movements more mechanical than usual, he found the conference room empty, a tomb of mahogany and leather. And there, left behind on a side table, like an afterthought, was a single discarded copy of the German document, stained with a dark ring of coffee. An oversight, a piece of trash. To them, it was worthless. To Miguel, it was a gauntlet thrown down not to him, but to the very idea of integrity. He folded the document carefully and slipped it inside his worn jacket, its weight a strange and familiar burden against his chest. Back in the warmth of his small apartment, with Camilla sleeping soundly in her room, her breaths a soft, steady rhythm. In the quiet, he sat at their little kitchen table. The city was finally hushed. He spread the papers under the dim glow of a single hanging bulb. The title was stark: Partnerschaftsvereinbarung, Partnership Agreement. But beneath it, the dense blocks of text were a fortress of legalese, a dialect of German few could speak, Gesellschaftsrecht, corporate law, woven with the technical jargon of biotechnology. As his eyes scanned the first paragraph, the letters and umlauts began to shift. The kitchen faded away, and he was no longer a janitor. He was back in the hallowed halls of Heidelberg University, the scent of old books and chalk dust in the air. He was Professor Alvarez standing before a lecture hall of eager students, deconstructing the etymology of a single word, showing them how language was a living thing, a carrier of history, culture, and intent. He saw Elena in the front row, her smile his anchor, her belief in him, the fuel for his brilliance. The memory was sharp, and it brought with it the dull, familiar ache of loss. Their life had been one of rich, intellectual beauty until the sickness came. It was aggressive, unforgiving, demanding a different kind of strength from him. It required not intellectual rigor, but the steady, relentless presence of a caregiver. He'd left his post, his research, his world to be with her, to hold her hand through the endless treatments, to read her poetry, when her own eyes grew too tired. After she was gone, returning to that life felt impossible. The world of ideas seemed trivial compared to the tangible, immediate needs of his heartbroken daughter. So he had built a new life, a simpler one, brick by quiet brick. He had packed away the professor and become the janitor because Camilla needed a father more than the world needed another academic. But now, looking at this document, the ghost of that former life was not a painful specter. It felt like an old friend, a forgotten tool rediscovered. He ran a finger over a complex phrase, die Übertragung von geistigem Eigentum und unwiderruflichen Nutzungsrechten, the transfer of intellectual property and irrevocable usage rights. A chill went down his spine. This was not a partnership agreement. It was a quiet, legal, and exquisitely crafted heist, and he, the invisible man who mopped the floors, was the only one who could see it. Miguel worked through the night, the small kitchen table becoming his new lecture hall. He filled a yellow legal pad with notes, his handwriting, once elegant and flowing now, a tight, focused script. He cross-referenced clauses, circled words, and drew arrows connecting seemingly disparate sections. The janitor had vanished, completely replaced by the linguistic detective, the man who hunted for meaning in the dense thickets of syntax. He felt an intellectual fire reignite within him, a purpose that went beyond the morning pancakes and evening bedtime stories. This wasn't just about a job. It was about the fundamental nature of truth. It was about honoring the very structure of language that the powerful had dismissed as mere noise. He was so engrossed that he didn't hear the soft patter of small feet. Camilla stood in the doorway, her favorite stuffed bunny clutched in one hand, her eyes wide with sleep and curiosity. "Papi," she whispered, her voice a tiny anchor in his sea of concentration. "What are you doing?" Miguel looked up, startled. The first hint of dawn was painting the window gray, and he realized he hadn't slept. "Just some reading, Mija," he said, his voice hoarse. "Something important from work." She padded over to the table and peered at the document, her brow furrowed. She couldn't understand the strange words, but she understood the look on her father's face. It was the same intense focus he had when he was fixing her bicycle or helping her with a difficult drawing, a look of deep, quiet concentration. In that moment, she saw not just a janitor, but her father, the smartest and strongest man in the world, doing something that mattered. "Is it a puzzle?" she asked, her voice filled with innocent wisdom. "Yes, mija," Miguel answered, a faint smile touching his lips. "It's a very complicated puzzle." Camilla watched him for a moment longer, then her eyes lit up with an idea. She scurried to her room and returned with her box of crayons and a fresh sheet of paper. She sat on the floor leaning against his leg and began to draw. The silence in the kitchen was broken only by the scratching of her crayon on paper and the soft rustle of Miguel turning a page. A shared quiet diligence filled the small space. When the sun was fully up, casting a warm glow across the floor, she tugged on his sleeve. "I made this for you, Papi." He looked down at the drawing she held up. On the page, a towering, gleaming castle was labeled Bionova. Standing before it was a stick figure with a familiar, kind face. In one hand, he held a shield, and in the other, not a sword, but a mop held like a knight's lance. The knight was guarding the castle from a creeping, shadowy monster with sharp, angry eyes. At the top, in her careful, childish script, she had written, "Papi the Protector." Miguel felt a lump form in his throat. His daughter, with her crayons and her pure heart, had seen him more clearly than anyone. She hadn't drawn a janitor. She had drawn a hero. He looked from her drawing to the complex legal document on the table. He was no knight, and this was no fairy tale. But Camilla, with her unwavering faith, had given him a compass. This wasn't just about professional pride or proving a cruel executive wrong. It was about protecting something. It was about living up to the hero his daughter already believed him to be. He carefully folded the crayon drawing and tucked it into his shirt pocket right over his heart. It was a shield made of paper and love, and it was the strongest armor he had ever known. With Camilla's crayon drawing as his shield, Miguel delved deeper into the labyrinthine text. The partnership with Zeitgeist Innovations was presented as a mutually beneficial collaboration, a fusion of Bionova's cutting-edge genetic research with Zeitgeist's powerful data processing capabilities. On the surface, it was a perfect match. But Miguel knew that in legal documents, the truth is never on the surface. It's buried in the footnotes, hidden in the subclauses, and disguised by deliberate ambiguity. Sometimes the plumber sees the leak before the architect notices the ceilings collapsing, and Miguel was about to find a crack in the foundation that threatened the entire tower. He focused on a section titled Anhang B Datennutzung und Verarbeitung. Appendix B Data Usage and Processing. It was here that the architecture of the heist was most brilliant and terrifying. The language was intentionally dense, a classic tactic to induce fatigue in the reader. It used compound nouns of staggering length, like Genome Data Aggregations Protocol. Genome data aggregation protocols designed to make the eyes of even a seasoned lawyer glaze over. But Miguel's eyes didn't glaze over. His mind, trained for this exact purpose, began to dismantle the fortress of words, brick by brick. He found the first crack, a clause that granted Zeitgeist the right to anonymize and aggregate Bionova's patient data for secondary analytical purposes. To an English-speaking lawyer, giving it a cursory look, this would seem like standard procedure, a nod to data privacy. But Miguel understood the nuance. The German definition of anonymisieren, used in this context, was weak reversible. It was a smokescreen, a linguistic sleight of hand. The next crack was wider. A seemingly innocuous phrase, unwiderrufliche und unbefristete Nutzungsrechte, granted Zeitgeist irrevocable and unlimited usage rights to any derivative data created from their analysis. This was the masterstroke. Zeitgeist could take Bionova's priceless genetic data, the product of decades of research and billions of dollars of investment, and by running it through their own algorithms, create a derivative dataset that they would then own. Forever. They weren't partnering with Bionova. They were planning to gut it, stealing its most valuable asset under the guise of collaboration. The final horrifying piece fell into place when he cross-referenced Appendix B with a section on liability, Haftungsbeschränkungen. A cleverly worded sentence indemnified Zeitgeist against any unauthorized data dissemination that occurred on their servers. In essence, if this anonymized data were to be breached or sold, which was clearly the intention, Bionova would have no legal recourse. They were being asked to hand over the keys to the kingdom and sign a waiver absolving the thief of any crime. Miguel leaned back the yellow legal pad in front of him, now a map of corporate espionage. Eric Shaw hadn't just been arrogant, he had been a willing accomplice, or a fool of catastrophic proportions. This document wasn't a contract, it was a weapon. A silent ink and paper missile aimed at the heart of Bionova, and the countdown had already begun. He looked at the drawing tucked in his pocket. He wasn't just a protector of floors anymore. He was the protector of a future he had never known was his to guard. The weight of his discovery settled on Miguel like a physical shroud. He was an invisible man, a janitor. How could he, a ghost in the corporate machine, deliver a message of this magnitude? Walking into Veronica Liang's office would be impossible. He'd be stopped by security, dismissed as a crank, before he could utter a single word. Writing a detailed email would be just as futile. It would be filtered out by an assistant lost in the digital noise of a CEO's inbox. He needed a different kind of language, a message that was as quiet and as pointed as the threat itself. The truth doesn't need a megaphone. It just needs to stay standing. He had to get Veronica's attention to bypass the corporate armor and speak directly to the woman inside. But how he thought about the 40th floor, about the sterile perfection of her corner office. He had cleaned that office hundreds of times. He knew the precise arrangement of the files on her desk, the brand of pens she used, the faint scent of jasmine from a diffuser. And he knew about the flower. On the corner of her massive desk, in a simple, elegant crystal vase, was always a single, perfect stargazer lily. It was the only personal soft touch in a room of hard angles and cold chrome. It was a detail most would overlook, a silent testament to something beyond the world of balance sheets and stock prices. It was the same flower Elena had cherished, the one he had filled their small apartment with during her final weeks. The sight of it in Veronica's office had always struck him as a strange, quiet echo of his own past, a shared, unspoken language of beauty and loss. That was his opening, an intimate detail, a recognition. He wouldn't write a long letter. He would plant a single seed of doubt. The next night, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs, he approached her office. The door was unlocked. He slipped inside, the silence of the room amplifying the sound of his own breathing. He took a small, crisp sheet of paper from his pocket. On it, he had written just 5 words. He chose them with the precision of a poet. From the heart of the treacherous document, he pulled one key phrase, unwiderrufliche Rechte. Beneath it, he wrote the stark, unvarnished English translation, irrevocable rights. He didn't sign it. He simply folded the note and propped it against the crystal vase right beside the stargazer lily. It was a message that asked a question without speaking it. Did you know? Did you see this? It was a warning whispered into the heart of the silent tower. It was an act of profound trust and desperate hope, a message sent from one ghost to another, praying to be seen. He slipped back out of the office, leaving the small white note to do its work, a quiet bomb waiting for the sun to rise. He had done his part. Now it was up to the queen of the castle to see the threat at her own gates. Veronica Liang arrived at her office before sunrise, as she always did. Her life was a fortress built of discipline and control each day, a campaign planned with military precision. But as she stepped into her sanctuary of chrome and glass, her eyes immediately caught the foreign object. The small folded note beside the lily was a disruption, a crack in the perfect sterile surface of her world. Annoyed at the breach of her sanctum, she unfolded it, her movements sharp and impatient. Unwiderrufliche Rechte. Irrevocable rights. The words meant nothing and everything. It was a phrase from the Zeitgeist contract. She vaguely recalled a piece of jargon her legal team had glossed over. But seeing it, there stripped of its context, stark, and isolated, it felt different. It felt like a warning. Her first instinct was suspicion. Was this a threat, corporate espionage from a rival? But her gaze drifted to the stargazer lily. The flower was not a corporate accessory. It was a secret tribute to her mother, a brilliant botanist who had died when Veronica was a girl, leaving her to be raised by a father who believed emotion was a liability. The lily was the one soft thing she allowed herself, a private daily ritual of remembrance. That someone knew its significance and had placed this cryptic message beside it felt deeply personal. It sliced through something brittle in her armor. The note stayed with her all morning, a nagging dissonance under the surface of her back-to-back meetings. It made her see her surroundings with new eyes. For the first time, she noticed the quiet efficiency of the woman who brought her coffee, the tired lines around the eyes of the security guard in the lobby. The building was not just a machine. It was filled with people with invisible lives. How many of them carried silent knowledge? Later that afternoon, a flicker of memory led her past the janitor's supply closet on the 28th floor. Taped to the door was a child's drawing. It depicted a knight with a mop guarding a castle. Veronica stopped. She had seen the drawing before in a pile of papers an assistant was clearing from a conference room. She had thought it was just a stray piece of art from a Bring Your Child to Work day. But now, seeing it again, a connection sparked in her mind. The silent, stoic janitor who was always there in the background. The man with the kind, sad eyes. She went back to her office and pulled up the security footage from the previous night. She watched as Miguel Alvarez entered her office, his movements gentle and deliberate. He placed the note beside the lily and left as quietly as a breath. It wasn't a threat. It was an act of quiet courage. The drawing, the note, the flower. It was a language she was only just beginning to understand. The ice around Veronica Ling's heart built over decades of loss, and ruthless ambition began to show the first signs of a thaw. She buzzed her assistant. "Get me everything you can find on the Zeitgeist deal," she said, her voice low and urgent, "and find out who Miguel Alvarez is." Armed with a seed of doubt that had blossomed into full-blown suspicion, Veronica canceled her afternoon meetings and locked herself in her office. She dismissed her legal team's cursory summary of the Zeitgeist contract and demanded the original German document and all related correspondence. For the next several hours, she became an investigator, the CEO transforming into a forensic analyst. She didn't have Miguel's linguistic skills, but she had a mind honed for spotting patterns and a gut instinct that was now screaming at her. The foundation matters more than the penthouse, and she finally understood that hers was cracking. She started with Eric Shaw's email chains. He had championed this deal with a fervor that bordered on obsession, steamrolling concerns, and fast-tracking approvals. As she scrolled through months of correspondence, a pattern emerged. Eric had consistently routed key communications through his private email, bypassing Bianova's secure servers. He'd held private off-the-books meetings with Zeitgeist's CEO. He'd personally selected the German law firm that drafted the final agreement, calling them the best in the business. A firm she now saw was a subsidiary of a Zeitgeist-owned holding company. The puzzle pieces began to lock into place. Using a powerful translation software, Veronica started feeding the German contract through line by line. The software, like any human lawyer without deep context, struggled with the dense legalese, spitting out clunky, ambiguous phrases. But it was enough. She found the sections on Datennutzung and Haftungsbeschränkungen. Even with the clumsy translation, she could see the danger. The language was all about what Zeitgeist could do, and very little about what Bianova could prevent. It was a one-way street, paved with her company's most valuable secrets. The final damning discovery came from a deep dive into Eric's financials, a privilege reserved for the highest echelons of the company. A complex web of offshore accounts revealed a recent massive wire transfer. The source was a shell corporation, whose parent company was Zeitgeist Innovations. It wasn't a bonus, it was a down payment. Eric Shaw hadn't been negligent. He was the architect of the entire deception. He wasn't just selling a partnership, he was selling Bianova's soul for a personal fortune. The betrayal was a cold, sharp blade in her gut. Eric had been her right hand for 5 years. She had trusted him. He was a product of the very system she had built, a system that rewarded aggressive ambition and overlooked the quiet work of building things to last. She looked at the crayon drawing of the knight with the mop which she had retrieved from the supply closet door. This janitor, this man she had never bothered to learn the name of, had shown more loyalty and integrity in a single anonymous act than her own COO had in 5 years. The warning hadn't just been a lifeline for the company, it had been a lifeline for her. She had been blind, and an invisible man was teaching her how to see. Veronica knew she had to act, but she needed more than suspicion and circumstantial evidence. She needed undeniable proof, a key to unlock the true meaning of the contract in a way no software could. She needed the silent witness. She needed the man who saw what everyone else, including herself, had missed. That evening, she found Miguel on the 28th floor, methodically cleaning an empty office. He looked up as she approached, his expression calm, showing no surprise. It was as if he had been expecting her. In his quiet stillness, she felt the frantic, panicked energy of her own day begin to settle. "Mr. Alvarez." Veronica began, her voice softer than she intended. The usual armor of her CEO persona felt ill-fitting and false in his presence. It was a language of power, and she was beginning to understand it was the only one she knew how to speak. "Ma'am," he replied, his hands still on the handle of his buffer, his posture one of quiet respect. She didn't know where to start. An interrogation felt wrong. This man owed her nothing. He had already given her a warning he never had to give. She decided on the truth, a currency she hadn't traded in for a long time. "Someone left me a note," she said, her eyes meeting his. "It led me to look more closely at a contract. A contract I believe is designed to destroy this company." Miguel's gaze was steady. He didn't confirm or deny anything. He just listened. His silence was not empty. It was patient, respectful, giving her the space to find her own words. It was a form of strength she had never encountered in a boardroom. "I believe Eric Shaw is betraying us." She continued, the words tasting like poison. "But the language in the document is a fortress. My lawyers, my software, they see the walls, but they can't find the secret doors. The person who wrote me that note, they see everything." She took a step closer, holding out the crayon drawing of the night, which she had taken from the closet door. "Your daughter drew this," she said. "She thinks you're a protector." A faint, sad smile touched Miguel's lips for the first time. It was a smile that held the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. "She has her mother's heart," he said quietly. It was the opening Veronica needed. "Tell me about her," she urged gently. "Tell me about you." And so, in the quiet of that empty office, surrounded by the scent of cleaning solution and the distant hum of the city, Miguel spoke. He told her about Elena, about her love for history and language. He told her about his life as a professor and the choice he made to leave it all behind for Camilla. He wasn't asking for pity. He was simply stating the facts of his life, the foundation upon which his quiet strength was built. He taught her that being broken doesn't mean you stop creating. It just means you make different music. As she listened, Veronica understood. This wasn't about money or revenge for Miguel. It was about principle. It was about protecting the legacy of hard work, the very thing he embodied every single night. "I've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning," Veronica said, her voice firm with newfound resolve. "I am going to expose Eric, but I need someone who can translate the truth. I don't need you to speak, Mr. Alvarez. I just need you to show them what you see." Miguel looked at the crayon drawing in her hand, then back at her. For the first time, he saw past the CEO. He saw a woman who was trying to protect something too. He gave a single slow nod. That was all the answer she needed. The beyond of a boardroom was electric with tension. The emergency meeting had been called with no explanation, and the assembled board members shifted in their leather chairs, whispering in confused and irritated clusters. Eric Shaw sat near the head of the table, looking supremely confident, a smirk playing on his lips. He assumed Veronica had discovered his offshore accounts, but he had covered his tracks with layers of legal firewalls. He believed he was untouchable. Veronica entered her presence, commanding immediate silence. She didn't take her seat. She stood at the head of the table, her gaze sweeping across the room, before landing on Eric. "I've called this meeting because our partnership with Zeitgeist Innovations is a lie," she stated, her voice cold and clear. "It is not a collaboration. It is an act of corporate treason designed to steal our most valuable asset, our proprietary data." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Eric laughed, a short barking sound. "Veronica, with all due respect, you're being paranoid. Our legal team reviewed the documents. It's a standard boilerplate agreement." "Is it, Eric?" Veronica countered, her voice dangerously soft. She held up the thick German contract. "Did our legal team understand the nuance of Section 4 Subclause B, which grants Zeitgeist unwiderrufliche Nutzungsrechte, irrevocable usage rights to all derivative data? Did they understand that this allows them to legally replicate and resell our entire genetic research library, leaving us with nothing?" Eric's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected her to have such specific knowledge. "That's a misinterpretation of complex legal language." "Then let's simplify it," Veronica said. She gestured to the door. "I've asked for an expert opinion." The door opened, and Miguel Alvarez walked in. He wasn't wearing his janitor's uniform. He was dressed in a simple, clean suit that he kept for parent-teacher conferences and emergencies. It was old, but it fit him with a quiet dignity. He carried a single yellow legal pad. The board stared, confused. Eric Shaw's face went pale, then flushed with rage. "What is this? You're bringing in a janitor for legal advice. This is a farce. This," Veronica said, her voice ringing with authority, "is the man who cares more about this company's foundation than anyone in this room. He doesn't need a title to have integrity." Miguel said nothing. He simply walked to the whiteboard at the side of the room. He didn't look at the board members, at Eric, or even at Veronica. He picked up a marker, and in a clear, steady hand, he began to write. He wrote a German phrase from the contract, then beside it, the simple, devastating English truth. He deconstructed the legalese with the quiet precision of a surgeon. He showed how data aggregation was a mask for duplication, how indemnification was a license to steal. He never spoke a word. The only sound was the squeak of the marker on the board. His silence was more powerful than any shouting match. It was the irrefutable academic and methodical demolition of a lie. When he was finished, he put the cap on the marker, placed it neatly in the tray, and turned to face the room. The truth hung in the air, undeniable. The board was speechless. Eric Shaw was broken, his arrogance shattered by a quiet man with a marker. Real bravery isn't measured by volume. It's measured by silence. And in that moment, Miguel's silence was the loudest sound anyone in that room had ever heard. In the weeks following the explosive board meeting, a quiet revolution took place at Bionova. Eric Shaw was gone, his dismissal swift and absolute, a footnote in a corporate drama that would never become public. The deal with Zeitgeist was dead, and a new era of vigilance had begun. Veronica Ling, forever changed by the revelation of how close she had come to ruin, started dismantling the corporate culture that valued aggressive optics over quiet competence. She started by seeing the people she had long ignored. She learned that the best leaders don't move ahead of their people, they move with them. She wanted to reward Miguel, to give him a place of honor within the company he had saved. Her first instinct was to offer him an executive position, a corner office, a title befitting his intellect. She arranged to meet him not in the cold formality of her office, but at a small, unassuming diner near his apartment, a place with checkered floors, vinyl booths, and the comforting scent of coffee and fried onions. A place that felt real. Miguel was already there when she arrived, sitting in a booth with Camilla, who was happily coloring on a paper placemat. Seeing them together in their own world, Veronica felt a pang of something she hadn't felt in years, a longing for simple, uncomplicated connection. She slid into the booth opposite them. "Mr. Alvarez." "Miguel," she said, correcting herself. "Camila." Camilla looked up and gave her a shy, brilliant smile. Hello, Ms. Liang. My poppy told me you're the queen of the castle. Veronica's laugh was genuine. Something like that, she said. She turned to Miguel. I've created a new division at Bionova, the Department of Strategic Integrity. It will oversee all contracts, all partnerships, ensuring we are never vulnerable again. I want you to run it. The title, the salary, it's yours. You've earned it. Miguel listened patiently, then looked at his daughter, who was now drawing a crown on Veronica's head in her placemat portrait. He smiled softly. Ms. Liang, Veronica, I appreciate the offer more than you know, but my place is here. He said, his hand gently resting on Camilla's shoulder. My most important title is Poppy. I can't go back to a world of 80-hour weeks and board meetings. I won't. Veronica's face fell, but he wasn't finished. But I do want to help, he continued. I can't be a director, but maybe the company could use an advisor, a linguistic integrity advisor. I could review the documents you need me to from home. I can still protect the castle, just from a different tower. In that moment, Veronica saw the depth of his character. He wasn't refusing power. He was defining it on his own terms. His family came first. Always. It was a lesson her own father had never taught her. I've never admired anything more, she said, her voice thick with emotion. An advisor it is. We'll build a new foundation, Miguel. One based on truth. She looked at the drawing. Camilla was finishing a portrait of the three of them sitting together in the diner booth. A new kind of partnership, one built not on paper, but on respect. 6 months later, the light in Miguel's small apartment was warm and golden. The air was filled with the scent of garlic and basil and the sound of soft laughter. A pot of spaghetti sauce simmered on the stove, and Camilla was meticulously setting the table, placing her hand-drawn placemats at each of the 3 settings. The scene was one of perfect ordinary happiness, a quiet masterpiece painted in the colors of earned peace. A quiet knock came at the door. It's open, Camilla called out, her voice bright with anticipation. Veronica Ling stepped inside, not as the CEO of a billion-dollar company, but as a friend. She was dressed in soft jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back loosely. She carried a bag of groceries with a loaf of crusty bread peeking out. Am I late? She asked, her smile easy and genuine. You're just in time to stir the sauce, Miguel said, handing her a wooden spoon. His own smile was relaxed, the tired lines around his eyes softened by a deep and abiding contentment. The transformation in all of them was profound. Bionova was thriving under a new philosophy of transparency and integrity, with Miguel as its quiet, unseen guardian. But the real change was here, in this small, love-filled kitchen. Veronica was a regular visitor, her weekends no longer filled with work, but with trips to the park museum visits with Camilla and these simple shared dinners. She was learning the language of family, a dialect more complex and more beautiful than any she had ever known. Love isn't fixing. Love is staying. And she had stayed. As they sat down to eat, Camilla held up a new drawing. It wasn't of a castle or a knight. It was a simple picture of a house with 3 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. This is our home, she announced proudly. Home is when we all fit in the same picture. Miguel looked at Veronica, whose eyes were shining with unshed tears. She had spent her life building an empire of glass and steel, only to find a true home in a small apartment with a former janitor and his remarkable daughter. She had learned that family wasn't something you inherit. It was something you build with trust and presence and shared spaghetti dinners. Found families are still real. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest stories aren't found in the headlines or the boardrooms. They are found in the quiet spaces, in the moments when we have the courage to see the invisible people and to let them see us. Because in the end, the most valuable thing you can protect isn't a company. It's the quiet, steady beating of a hopeful heart. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We'd love to know which part of the world this story has reached. What was your favorite moment in Miguel and Veronica's journey? Let us know. If you believe that quiet courage can change the world and that dignity doesn't need a title, give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Your support helps us continue to share stories that find the light in unexpected places. Until next time, take care of your heart and take care of each other. And so we see that sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one with the loudest voice, but the one with the quietest truth. The real treasures aren't kept in vaults, but in the hearts of those who have the courage to see what others overlook. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. It means the world to us to see how far these stories travel. What part of Miguel's journey stayed with you the most? If you believe in the power of quiet heroes and second chances, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Don't forget to subscribe to Second Chance Hearts and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for watching Second Chance Hearts. Until next time, stay kind and remember that your story is still being written.